All right, so we're rolling. Uh, Trevor, how are you?
Great. How about you?
Pretty good, pretty good. So why don't you just take a couple of minutes and tell everybody who you are, what you do, and why we're talking today?
All right. My name's Trevor Lane. I am one of the hosts of the ManTools podcast, which is a men's issues podcast. We stream live every Thursday.
Oh, cool.
And uh, yeah, we're here to talk about the red pill, men's rights. We'll probably get into men go their own way and all of that stuff. So,
So the red pill is something I've been fascinated with for 3 years now, I think. Um, and it's pretty divisive, you know.
yeah.
So what what would you say your experience with it is, and how did you get, how did you become aware of it, and how did you get involved with it, and like what's your stance on the whole thing?
Well, it probably started like a lot of guys that get involved in it with what amounted to a divorce. It turned out
Mm.
we weren't actually married. Fun fact or fun surprise was that she was not divorced from her ex-husband when we split. So, uh, dodged some bullets
Well,
there.
I mean, listen, thank God for small miracles, I guess.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So, not to get too deep into that, but that meant we only had to deal with child support.
Mm.
After all the threats of I'm going to take your house and I'm going to take your car and you're just going to keep paying for it and
Mm.
all that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, I think that's probably part of what gives the red pill as a movement a bad name is it's viewed as, and there are a lot of, that experience is pretty common. It is a
Mm.
lot of kind of scorned men
Yeah.
and or as some are called now, incels.
Mm.
Uh, who are viewed as they just
Affectionately.
hate women. Yeah,
Yeah.
they just hate women because of their poor experience, and to a certain extent, I think that is true. Um, but the term red pill comes from the Matrix,
Mm.
obviously. It the You can be red pilled about any number of things. I guess the big label has been attached to men's rights and men's issues,
Mm.
but it's really seeing the truth beyond the kind of facade that you're given
Mm.
through your upbringing or whatever. But that's kind of how I started uh, down, that path. And I mean, in the Matrix sense, I would call myself red pilled.
Mm.
I'm not per se a red pill men's rights kind of guy. I mean, I did see the disparity in the family court system,
Mm.
and I think that's where people when people start talking about men's rights, um, obviously rights have a legal connotation, and I think
Mm.
that's where it's seen more than like criminal cases and stuff like that. Although there are some disparities there as well, but I think it's more so when men face a judge in family court and see how biased that system can
Mm.
be.
So, what has the response been online to you doing this podcast? And you said you live stream every Thursday.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
I mean, I
Every
guess how
Thursday.
long have you been doing the podcast and doing the live streaming, and what has the response been?
Well, so a little background: the podcast started in 2019, but before that, we were actually an online radio show. I don't know if you
Hmm.
remember internet radio. It happened for like a second, and then podcasting took over.
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, so we were an internet radio show briefly, and then that station went under, and we decided to go on our own,
Hmm.
um, and started the podcast in 2019. Um, and it's a mixed response. One of our biggest fans happens to be a woman, um,
Hmm.
so that's interesting and kind of unexpected. Um, but we get our share of hate, um, especially if we talk about um, some of the biases in, again, the family court system.
Hmm.
The Man, you start saying that the state has no business securing someone's lifestyle, uh, they get very upset.
Ugh. I mean.
So
Can't imagine
we've
why.
been called
Like,
the other wild thing that was unexpected is we get called racist all the time, and it's like we're not even talking about race issues. Like, I mean, every once in a while something that has to do with race will come up,
mm,
but for the most part, I think it's just, you know, people that have a certain perception of the broader red pill men's rights movement
yeah.
just attach labels to whoever
I
they
mean,
happen to be.
it's one of the quickest ways to devalue what you're saying. If you're labeled a racist, then
Sure, yeah,
nobody has to listen to you, right?
yeah.
They don't
And,
have
well,
to contend with your arguments.
well, it's weird because like I can understand being called sexist. Like,
Mm,
sure, yep. It's from a certain point of view, I'm sexist.
mm.
Um, because I want to stop the special treatment of women in the court system. That's sexist, I guess.
I guess,
So
yeah.
sure. Um, but when they're like, you're a Nazi or you're racist, it's like, well, we don't really talk about any of that, so I
Mm.
don't know where you're getting that from. Other
The,
than two white guys, I guess that makes us racist.
well, listen, you just got the wrong. I don't know. Is there ever any like supporting arguments for the accusations that come your way? Like you're racist because you said this, or is it just flat,
uh,
just like
typically it's pretty empty.
yeah,
There was one like in the context of a joke and with a black guest, I might add. We were talking about gun control,
hmm,
and I used the N word because gun control has roots in racism. If you don't know
hmm,
the history, it was after the Civil War. They didn't want black people to have guns,
hmm,
and I said the movement that then was to keep N words
hmm,
from having guns and shooting all the former slave owners.
hmm,
And the black guy who was on the show with us was like, yep, that's exactly what
hmm,
it was for. So that's like one of the
yeah,
few times where I guess if you're going to call me a racist, yes, I use that term, but
hmm.
within the context of how I used it, it was first off the black person that was with us was, and secondly, that was the attitude of the people at the time.
Hmm. It's, I mean, probably a mistake on your part, just because of how uh, I think provocative using that word can be. But
Sure, yeah,
I don't think it justifies labeling you as a racist though, because I mean, maybe I'm just different in this respect. It's like I'm looking for intent. Like, what's your intent?
right, yeah,
And
yep.
so, also, if you're speaking to somebody, right? So if you're having a conversation with somebody and you use that word, I kind of feel like that's between you two, right? And so if you're both okay
Well,
with it, then
I would agree, but I'm gonna play devil's advocate there and say because we were streaming on the internet, it wasn't just between us two. you know.
yes, and which is why I say I think it was probably a mistake to do, but I think it's still between you two, and whether or not your audience continues to watch and support you is on them. So if they don't
Right. You
like
sure.
it,
Yeah.
then that's
Yeah.
what they can do.
Well, and the attacks came from people that aren't really, I wouldn't say are really our audience. They saw like the little clip or whatever, and it was just this guy's a fucking racist, and it's
Mm,
like, well, did you? It's kind of it's similar to, although I'm not Shane Gillis, but it's similar to if you saw what he said that got him canceled, lost his job at Saturday Night Live. He was talking about city planners and how they came up with the idea of Chinatowns, and he goes, I guess they're going to put the C word for Asians
mm,
over here. Like in context, he wasn't calling anybody that word.
right.
Again, intent. He wasn't in, his intent was not to disparage that group of people.
Mm.
It was a commentary on
He was
how these
supposed to be
different
funny.
cities.
Like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think what. So maybe we can digress a little bit and talk about this, because I've been thinking a lot about the left um, for a while. Like, I used to consider myself a liberal, and like I haven't changed any of my views, over the last decade or so. But I'm no longer a liberal, and so it's like this expanding. The left is like dragging their ideology further and further away from center, and so by virtue of just standing still, I'm becoming more and more conservative.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I
so
mean, that's a thing that's definitely happened. The Overton window used to be here, so you were left or right.
mhm.
Now it's going.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now, where you were on the left, you're further over here.
I mean, so I remember really what did it. This was around the time, actually, it was like when the Louis C.K. accusations came out, and there was a thread, I think, somewhere on Facebook maybe, and a bunch of my friends were like calling for his head, calling for him to be canceled, and I'm like, can we just like hold on a second? What, like, you don't even know that these accusations are real or that they're true. Can we not drag a man's name through the mud before we
Yeah.
have confirmation? And no, they didn't want to
Yeah.
hear that. They didn't like that.
I took some serious shit because uh was it last year, 2 years ago, he won a Grammy for a comedy album, and everyone was like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Look, now that we know what happened,
Hmm.
you it sure it was shitty, I guess, because he's well, the way I put it was I kept accusing them of kink shaming, um,
I
because
mean,
his thing was he liked to masturbate in front of people,
hmm,
women in particular. Um, there was no evidence, or at least concrete evidence. There were some accusations, I guess, that he wouldn't let people leave. But others that experienced it, most famously Sarah Silverman was like, no, you could totally say no and leave the room
hmm,
when he did that. Um, so he would say, "Hey, I'm gonna jerk off. It would be cool if you watch me, but you don't have to." Um,
hmm,
and now the the accusation that has a little more teeth is that, and I think this is on the victims in quotes, that they thought by doing that it would result in some kind of success on their part because he produces movies and TV shows. Well, I'm sorry, that's on
hmm.
you if you think that's what's going to happen and then it
Right,
doesn't.
right,
Unless he goes, I'll give you a TV show if you watch me jerk off.
right.
um,
And even then, I think you still have to have some concrete evidence there.
yeah, yeah,
Like, just
right.
for me personally, if somebody says that, I'm like, I'm gonna need that in writing before I commit, kind of
Sure. Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe that's just me. So it's been so whenever that was, it's been a couple of years since I was really kind of disillusioned with the left, and then watching a lot of what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years unfold. I think um, well, what do you think? What do you think about it? Because there are some people, for whatever reason, who seem to be impervious to being canceled. What do you think that is? Why do you think there are some people who, in spite of all of the attacks and all of the things that they, been accused of, I mean, Joe Rogan comes to mind for, I think obvious reasons, but uh, why do you think? Well, let's just talk about him. Why do you think they haven't been able to cancel him?
Well, I guess I'm in the dark about what he's been accused of. Like,
It's
has he been Me Too'd in some way? I hadn't heard about that.
no, 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 no. So did you hear about the thing that they did with COVID with him?
Where he
Because
was using
that's
he was using ivermectin plus a
yeah,
couple other drugs,
yeah,
and
yeah,
like CNN yellowed the
yeah,
photo and they
yeah,
put
yeah,
it up. Yeah, yeah, okay,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's not that but like people have been canceled for stuff like that, going
well,
going
I
against
think
the narrative. So
in his case it would have just been too costly for Spotify. They just had signed the deal with him for whatever it was, $100 million or something like that,
mm,
and it would have been too costly in their minds, to have him leave and still have to pay that. Like, you know what I mean? Even
right,
if he was sitting on his thumbs for the rest of his contract, which is usually the deal, you can't do anything with those deals. But they would have been obligated to continue paying him. So instead, they decided to start slapping warning labels anytime he discussed COVID. I
Mm.
guess that appears to be the solution. Um, so I think in his case, it was just his audience is too big. Spotify had just inked that deal with him. Maybe if it was towards the end of that contract, they would have had a different opinion because they wouldn't have had to pay so much for nothing. But I think it was just they weren't going to pay that much money to have no product to put out. So they rolled with it.
So from a business point of view, it didn't make sense to cancel him. So you think that played in?
I absolutely
Mm.
do. Yeah.
I don't get the sense that if he were canceled, that he would stop the podcast.
I don't either. I think he would have found a place somewhere or
Mm.
built his own. And he has the resources where he could have made the Joe Rogan podcast network
Right.
and maybe had some other shows, that he likes. Who knows? But he seems like the type where he just would have. And there are other
But
people like that. Another one that comes to mind. I don't know if you're familiar with Anthony Cumia, who used to be part of Opie and Anthony.
mm, yeah,
He
not
got
not super
fired.
familiar, but I know the name.
Well, he got fired. It's a wild story. He was taking photographs of scaffolding in New York, which uh, is a pretty common artsy thing to do
Mm.
especially with a high end camera, which he had. But it was like 3 o'clock in the morning in Times Square, and I guess he incidentally caught. Well, I'm not even sure if he actually took a picture of this person, but there was a person there who was a prostitute and
Mm.
did not want their picture being taken. So they assaulted him. Now, keep in mind,
Mm.
he is a concealed carrier. So he was armed and could have shot this person, but did not. He
Mm.
didn't even fight back. And then he tweeted about, I think he used the word savage. And of course, it was, well, you're a racist piece of shit, blah, blah, blah. So
Mm.
SiriusXM canceled, it fired him. They kept Opie. Um, and he launched his own network. It's behind a paywall. It's like $8 a month or whatever, but he has
Mm.
like a bunch of shows of other people that are kind of in the same boat that he's friends with. Um, and I think that's kind of the move now. You can be canceled, and you
Right.
just through the magic of the internet, um, you can launch your own platform.
Mm.
So, and I think that's what
Mm.
Joe Rogan would have done
I
had
agree. Yeah.
Spotify let him go. He would have just launched his own platform.
Yeah. I'm interested in this question because there've been attempts to cancel, you know, a lot of the guys on, in that space. And it almost seems like you can only be canceled if they let you, or if you let them cancel you,
Hmm.
right? So even if they take you down from I mean the whole being demonetized on YouTube and then having your videos taken down and things like that is, I think, heinous. But it's
Yeah, we,
like,
we we just went through that with a clip. It was insane. I don't know if you remember a couple of weeks ago where a Sikh 7-Eleven owner beat the shit out of this dude that was stealing from his shop. It was in California where
mm,
like it's legal to steal up to $1,000 or whatever. But this guy had enough of this dude coming in,
they
and
just,
he,
yeah,
he had a he had a like garbage can bin and was just scooping packs of cigarettes into it. And this guy just had enough of the
Jesus.
blatant. So he pulls out a 2x4 and starts whacking this dude in the ass, on the legs, and his partner's holding him down. Um, so we got hit with a glorifying violence or whatever.
Mm,
We covered it as a news story, and I even found a news clip that they let stay up
mm,
in shorts. And I'm like, what's the difference? And they never told me. They were just like, after reviewing, we see that this still violates our terms of service. And it's like, okay. I mean, I
mm,
guess because we had a little sense of humor. I mean, we were obviously more jokey than the straight news thing, but it's the same content. It was like, why is this, why is this violating your terms
mm.
when we do it, but when the news channel does it, it's fine. And no
Yeah,
clear answer, just
yeah.
fuck you, we're taking down your clip. Interestingly, though, the full episode stayed up. I age restricted it on my own just because, um, to be on the safe side, I didn't want them
Mm,
to come back and catch it and take the whole episode down. But
right.
yeah, it was, you know, we deal with that all the time too. So we're on our second strike. We got
What do
one
you?
more.
And I'm sorry. Just got to pause. Glorifying violence, like there's hours and hours and hours of MMA footage, and
Yeah,
I mean,
that's not even
Is
age
World Star
restricted.
Hip Hop still on YouTube? Is that a thing, or did they at least have the
I
decency
think
to
they're their own
remove that?
thing now. I think they're their own. I know they have their own website, and maybe they're just very careful what goes on YouTube.
Hmm.
To be honest, I don't know if World Star is still on YouTube. I think World Star is a separate video hosting thing now,
I
but
think you're
I
right,
don't know.
but the point still stands is that they're if you want to see somebody getting beat up, you can go to YouTube to do that.
Yeah,
So
and they're cheering it on more so than we were cheering on this Sikh guy that would, had enough of being stolen from. It
I mean,
was like,
mm, 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 mm.
and there wasn't he didn't even draw blood. Like, I mean, you watch those UFC matches or bare knuckle fighting. That's a new thing, the bare knuckle fighting championship.
Mm.
There's blood all over that cage, and it's fine.
Yep, yep. Does seem hypocritical.
Yep, yep.
And uh, how big is your? So you're on YouTube, right?
Our channel's tiny. I think we have like, and this is our second channel. The first one was getting fairly big, like
Mm,
500 maybe. I mean, that's not bad.
mm,
Um, and we did uh we did something on our Patreon, and this is maybe a little inside baseball, but back in the we've since left Patreon, but um Patreon didn't host its own videos, so you had to use either Vimeo or YouTube, and you would do like a private or unlisted video,
mm.
and we would end our we still do we end our premium videos with what we call our a testosterone booster. So it's girls in various levels of undress, and
Nice.
we did an episode with a soundboard where we interviewed Joe Biden, and because he had been in office since like 1970, we did girls of the 70s. So there was some Bush, and holy shit, I by the time I got home from doing that episode,
Mm.
our channel was gone, and I'm like, well, this is how did you
Whoa.
find this unlisted? It says unsearchable. Does that, but YouTube people can search it? Is that how that works? And they didn't really
Mm.
answer that. And they were just like, it's too late. Your channel's gone. There's no bringing it back. Okay. So we made another channel. It's very small. I mean, like I said, we're on our second strike. So if we get, from what I understand, if we get another one, that's it. The channel's gone.
So
So
the your
we're
second
probably not on
channel
YouTube much longer.
your second channel has two strikes on it.
Yeah, it has an old one. Like, I guess if you get two within 90 days, it's game over.
Mm.
But from what I understand, I'd have to reread the rules. If you get three total at all, your channel gets shit canned. So we're on strike two. Although the last one was like 6 months ago or something like that, um, which again was for something stupid. Um, yeah, we're if we get a third
It
one, that's it.
and they never clarify, do they?
No, they don't.
What really the strikes are for?
No, I guess they will if you're like a giant monetized channel because you're bringing in revenue for them. But for someone like
Maybe.
us,
Like I've heard some people
well,
who have big
the
shows.
the one that comes to mind is Steven Crowder because he keeps threatening to sue them. He has a lawyer on
Mm.
retainer. When they get strikes, his lawyer writes a letter and says, "You need to tell us why this is happening because I don't see, as a lawyer, uh, anything in your
Yeah.
rules that was violated." So he keeps getting strikes removed. He'll get to two and then have them removed because his lawyer is like, "We're going to sue you if you don't back off on this." Um, but
That's
obviously,
satisfying.
we don't have a lawyer on retainer. Um, and like I said, he's when he's monetized is obviously bringing in some money. He has a pretty big audience, so those ads get seen by a lot of people.
Mm.
Um, and I think that look, if I was YouTube, that would make a difference to me too. But what would be even cooler would be if you had straightforward rules and applied them
Yeah.
evenly to everybody.
Exactly. Exactly. Mm. Um I still consider myself a liberal. Um, but
Would you say you've drifted more to the classical liberal?
almost certainly,
Makes sense.
almost
Yeah.
certainly. I mean, I have
Or
actually.
or liberalism has left you as the
Liberalism
classical
has
liberal.
left me. It
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
has left me. I don't see any. I have always felt, I would say, disgusted by narratives that you cannot question.
Sure.
So if if you have a narrative and somebody has questions about it, even if they're dumb questions, even if they're bad questions, like those questions still, I think, need to be asked. Like you have to be able to ask questions, and it's just you cannot
Right.
ask questions about the narrative, and I don't like that.
Well, look, I don't know how I mean, I'm guessing you're not a big fan of Trump if you have considered yourself liberal, but do you agree with indicting him for taking moves to again question the results of the election? You know what I mean? Like,
So I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not nearly as well informed on this as I think most people are. I know that he's been indicted several times, but what I've seen enough of the political game to know that the things that happen on the surface are they don't mean anything. It doesn't to try and like draw conclusions from what's happening on the surface um, is I don't know. Like, so do I think it's fair that he's been indicted? Well, I guess I don't really know because I don't know the full extent of the situation, but I know that
well,
the
I'll put it this way: if you read the indictment, and I haven't read the whole thing, but these little snips that I've seen are pretty bananas. There's stuff like his chief of staff Meadows, I forget his first name, Mark Meadows, um, got him a phone number to a legislator in Pennsylvania. Which, by the way, how does this have anything to do with fucking Georgia? I have no idea.
mm,
But got him a phone number to a legislator who like the Speaker of the House or something in Pennsylvania, so that he could call him about their election results. And they're saying that that's part of furthering this conspiracy to over. It's like a chief of staff has an obligation to get a phone number when his boss says, "I want a phone number."
mm,
You know what I
I
mean?
mean, yeah,
Another thing that they pointed to was, I guess at some point Trump tweeted, "Hey, watch OAN tonight." That was furthering the conspiracy because they were going to discuss the election. Um, so I don't know. I I feel like this is a part of that. Well, here's the narrative. You must
yeah,
accept it.
yeah,
And in fact, if you don't, we're going to charge you with crimes and
mm,
make up, do whatever we have to do to come up with some kind of crime being committed. If you're big enough, obviously, like if little old me sits there and says maybe there's something fishy about the 2020 election, they don't really care.
right,
But when the guy that was running goes, I think this was stolen from me, um, to say that that's a crime, like, okay, Hillary Clinton said the same thing. Stacey Abrams
mm,
down in Georgia said the same thing. So it's apparently not a crime when your side asks the same
right,
questions,
right,
but when the other side says we have a problem with this, then it's an issue. And that's what I was getting at was, if
and
that's assuming that that's what's happening, like that, I mean, that's a huge example of no, you can't question the narrative. The narrative is A, B, and C happened, and if you say X, Y, and Z happened, you're going to be in trouble.
mm, mm. You know, I don't know nearly enough about politics, and what's happening to I think have an opinion on it. But I do know that ever since the 2016 election, this polarization between the left and the right, I think, is it's like at its maximum. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know that
I would
things could be
agree.
any more polarized than they are, because where it is now, it's like if anything is connected to Donald Trump, the left automatically hates it. Right?
Yeah,
There's no ability to have a discussion about it. There's no critical thinking applied to it. There's no nuance. And I've been thinking about this too. And one of the directions that I'm considering taking the channel is towards like a civil discourse operation. So I consider myself a fairly good moderator. And so to have people come in with opposing viewpoints and then demonstrate what civil discourse looks like to
yeah,
at least have something, for us to aim for. Because as it is now, our civil discourse really just happens on Twitter, and it's not civil,
well,
and it's not
if they're
discourse.
right.
Yeah. Um,
Well, the other problem there is like I would be a huge fan of something like that. The difficulty is almost if you're not to one of the extremes, no one wants to listen to it. It's like, well, you're not reinforcing my little echo chamber, so that makes you a them as opposed to an us.
right.
And now you can just immediately discard your opinion because you're a them.
Right.
Uh,
Listen. Um, well, it doesn't have to be relegated to only the realm of politics. So,
sure, but I mean, I'm saying a lot of even outside of politics, um, there's a lot of people that just this is my little worldview, and
mm,
if you're not reinforcing that, then you must be wrong.
mm. I still think that it's worthwhile, um, because whether people watch it or not, I don't know. Like you don't actually know until you try.
Right.
But me personally, I'm 33, so and I don't have really a career to speak of. I have a degree in psychology. I have a bachelor's, but you can't do a whole lot with just a bachelor's. And I've realized that I legitimately hate documentation so much. I don't think I can work in the field because I hate the documentation, and I struggle to motivate myself to do something that I don't see meaning or value in. And so it's like it's a waste of time to me, and I'm not going to do that.
Sure.
So but with this, it's like I said, I feel like I um I have potential to be a good moderator. And I don't know what else to do. I don't know what else to do. So
Well,
it's
no,
like
I mean, give it a
I'm trying to find my way, because the conventional pathways aren't really the right fit for me. Like I don't first of
Sure.
all, I don't feel like I'm using my skill set to its fullest with the
Yeah,
jobs
yeah.
that I have. And second of all, I feel like I have something uh, that needs to be said. And so yeah, that's where we are with that. And I feel like I don't know, there's solid footing, I think,
Okay.
there.
Yeah. I would love to see something like that.
Um I think that's bad podcast etiquette.
What?
Just the taking a sip of water.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
but whatever.
Hey, I'm drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning.
That's what's up. So Being a man is awesome.
I agree.
Why is that statement uh, catastrophic? Why why do you think that statement is controversial?
Well, I think it's because people view it as if you feel being a man is awesome, that must mean that you feel that being a woman isn't, which is
Mm,
not true. Without that qualifier, you have no idea how I feel about women. I just said
right,
being a man is awesome.
right.
So, um, yeah, it's kind of like here's a perfect example. If you go on Wikipedia and you look up Black Pride,
Hmm.
it goes into I forget how they word it, but it's like it's a Black identity movement. Um, Never uses the word racism. If you look up Native Pride,
Hmm.
same thing. You look at White Pride, completely different story. So, like,
Hmm.
not to bring
Yeah.
race into it. Again, I was talking about how we're accused of being racist, and here I am bringing up race in this, but um, I think it stands. I'm trying to make an analogy here that what's so controversial about saying I'm proud of whatever my heritage is?
Right.
I'm proud of being Norwegian. Oh,
Hmm.
you're a colonizer and whatever. Okay. um, you know, um,
Hmm.
so I think where it comes from is that there's a perception that if you think A is good, that must mean that you think B is bad,
Hmm.
and that's not necessarily true. Obviously, there are people that feel that way. There are genuine sexists and racists,
Hmm.
but for the most part, I think when people are like, "Oh, being a man is awesome," they don't mean to follow that up with, "And obviously, being a woman is shit." Like, you know,
I mean,
they both
uh,
can be true. I mean,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I just don't know. I'm not a woman. I have no idea. From my experience with my wife, there are obviously some things that I'm glad that I don't have to put up with as a woman.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, that time of the month is a
Hmm.
biological reality that I don't envy at all.
Yep.
Um, there are some other things where, uh, you know, that she can do that I can't do, like magically make a child. You
Yeah.
know, that's, I mean, I guess I help, but
Right.
not not in any, um, not in a laborious way, I guess.
Right. Right.
Like what they have to do. Um, so I mean, there are trade-offs and payoffs between both genders, um, and but I think the idea that one statement is controversial just comes from, well, you must mean that the opposite is also true, and it's like, not
See,
necessarily.
I think that's part of it. The other part, at least one of the other parts, being that like if you think that being a man is awesome, that means that you think the brutality or the capability of men to be malicious and brutal is also awesome.
Well, to quote Jordan Peterson, if you're not capable of violence, you can't be a peaceful man.
Hmm.
Um, Being a peaceful man means that I have the capability, I just have it under control.
Yes.
The flip is if you're completely incapable of violence, you're not peaceful. You're useless. I mean,
Right.
you know,
Well,
it's
and the thing is, also it doesn't mean that you're safe, right? Just because you're
sure, yeah,
incapable of violence, right? It means you're weak.
right,
And
yes, yeah, and weak men are dangerous.
weak men are dangerous.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Weak men commit school shootings. Like that's what happens.
there you go.
Um I think one of the things about being a man that isn't talked about really at all, kind of like outside of the manosphere, is dealing with the like they say the burden of performance is on men. But I think even more deeply than that, like the amount of responsibility that we adopt is, at least in this day and age, like it's kind of optional how much we choose to adopt. And there's not a what would you say? What's that word? Compelling or idealistic archetype for like what being a good man, could look like in our society. And so a lot of so for me, like a lot of what I internalized growing up was that being a man sucks, and I'm shitty for being a man, and I should be ashamed of myself. And a lot of that was internalized. And partly because you hear things like that much more regularly than you hear the opposite of it. Even when you hear like this is I was thinking about this and how crazy this is, that even when you're watching like a show and there's some quip in the show about how like, oh, men are over kind of thing.
The future is female.
Yeah. I still process that as it must be because men are bad. And it's almost an unconscious framing of myself and what it means to be a man. And for the life of me, I just don't understand how children who are not nearly aware of themselves as someone like you or me can hear that and be able to decipher that it's a point of view that's being expressed in a television show, and just because men have done horrible things does not mean that men are bad. Like I don't think that there's any way for a child to be able to make that differentiation.
Right. Yeah.
And so you internalize a lot of that because, oh, it must be true. Because there's no way to pierce through the ambiguity of the statement itself. And nobody's talking about it, and nobody's really presenting an alternative view for what being a man, could look like. And actually, like, why being a good man is both worthwhile for you to pursue and kind of fucking glorious. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a sense that I think that we get in our, I'm going to use this phrase, our traditional gender roles. Again, like being a liberal, for a long time, I kind of just felt that, oh, gender is socially constructed. The gender roles are socially constructed. They don't necessarily mean that they're not real. They're just, the whole line. I bought it for a while until my wife and I had children, and I kind of had a crisis of identity, like because
you saw the reality of biology then.
Yes. It was a big part. That was a big part of what it of what it was.
Yeah.
And I suspect that I have probably something closer to like a more feminine temperament. Not so much now, but definitely then. And so I bought into the idea that men and women can kind of do the same things, and the idea of gender roles are antiquated until we have children, and like all hell gets let loose. And no matter what I do, I feel like something's missing. And it wasn't really until I discovered that there are ancient genetic responses that happen to it's so hard to put in the words because it happens at like a primal level. It's like when I think about protecting my family, this thing like,
Yeah.
you know, this sense of I think really what it means to be a man, like burst forward. It's like it's insane actually. And so I've been thinking about that a lot. And weak men have no ability to instantiate order. And it's not the feminine prerogative, like it's not the female's responsibility to put things into order. Like it's not their responsibility, right? Not that they can't do it, right? Not that it's not, but I think the responsibility of putting things, putting the world in order, which really is the same thing as like protecting your tribe, or so I think that responsibility falls on the masculine imperative. And I don't say that lightly because it wasn't until I adopted that I accepted that it's my job to keep my family fed and protected.
Right.
That it legitimately like something genetic in me unlocked.
Well, yeah, I think that's a watershed moment for a lot of people, not just men. Once a woman has a baby, the
Here we go
sheer
talking about
effort,
talking about women, talking about other races. Man,
look,
we're gonna get
the
canceled.
the sheer effort and I don't know, the toll that takes on her body
Hmm.
means that if she wanted to, she couldn't fight off something that was attacking that child.
Mm-mm.
You know what I
No
mean?
way.
She couldn't go, hunting or even gathering probably at that point, especially if we're talking primitive or
Mm.
semi-primitive man, or human, however you want to put that. But even today, um, yeah, I mean they've pared down drastically the amount of time that women spend in the hospital, but there's
Mm.
still a period of time
You're
where just
incapacitated,
yep.
more or less. Yeah.
So if you have a job, you're not going to work for a while.
Which you
Regardless,
shouldn't.
well,
Yeah.
regardless of even if you had a baby to
Yeah.
take care of, like that's not happening. You're not going to
Right.
be able to
Right.
do the things that you were doing, at least for a period of time. Men have the, I guess, privilege. I hate the idea of male privilege being thrown around in the context that it's typically thrown around now,
Mm.
but we have the privilege, the obligation, uh, to take up any slack there in terms of providing, protecting,
Mm.
um, all of that. Like while she's out, you need to keep going to work, right?
Mm. Yep.
Because you're the one that can.
Yes.
Obviously, a lot of places have paid maternity leave and all of that, and even they're trying to even it out where you get this giant paternity leave, um, which is fine. That's cool.
Mm.
Um, but there's just like I said earlier, like biological reality will smack you in the face
Yeah.
with,
Yeah.
especially at that point. Um, and I've said often, you may not recognize it because when we're talking about traditional gender roles, but there is an evolutionary thing that's going on where I truly believe, and obviously there are exceptions, I truly believe that feminism has sold women a bill of goods, um, that somehow they would be happier serving a corporate master than their own family.
Yes.
It tells them, well, why would you want to be subservient to your husband and your children? Well, first off, typically you love your husband and your children. I
Mm.
mean, obviously there are some loveless marriages, but we'll go with the kind of
Oh,
default average.
we can talk about that. We can talk about that all day. But yeah.
Um, but so I don't understand the well, it's more empowering, it's more whatever for me to go work a 9 to 5 in an office um, than it is to do things in the home. Now,
Mm.
the flip to that is um, we often say on our show, there's no such thing as women's work or men's work. There's just work, and it all has to be done.
Mm.
I totally
I like
stand
that.
behind that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, even if you're conforming to the traditional gender roles, if you're a dude and you get home and there's housework type shit that needs to happen, fucking pitch in.
Yeah, it
You
needs
know
to be
what I mean?
done. Yeah. It needs to be done.
So, but I do generally think that women would be happier and men both would be happier conforming to those traditional gender roles because there is an
Well,
evolutionary and
yes,
biological thing that brought those about.
absolutely. You know, and this is the thing. The traditional gender roles, I think they're an emergent property of our species, right? I think society has been crafted to uh, support the traditional gender roles, because I don't know. I guess it just makes sense. Like, because for so long it was just common knowledge, right? For so long it was just, this is what men do, this is what women do. And so if we're going to build a nest to protect, our women and our young, then the whole thing should be constructed in a way that it makes sense for all of us to exist within. I watched, I watched Chimp Empire not too long ago.
Okay.
Did you?
I'm not familiar, but
It's a 4-part documentary series on Netflix about the Ngogo chimp troop, which is the largest chimp troop ever discovered and ever like studied.
okay.
So what I think is particularly, like, it's fascinating. Just it's absolutely mind blowing.
Did
And
they make
if you
fire?
what's up?
Did they make fire?
No, no, they didn't.
That's when we're that's when
But
we're done. When chimps
but
make fire, we were done.
but they hold grudges.
Oh yeah.
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 Um, but one of the things that I think was really fascinating is that the whole thing like revolves around this tension between these two chimp groups. One of them is bigger, and I think it's like 3 times bigger than the other one. And so they're this dispute. They were originally one big group, and then there was a dispute in the past, and they split.
Oh
And
wow.
the group that split off held a grudge against the bigger group's current alpha.
Sure. Yeah.
And like, we're talking years. Like,
Yeah.
they split, 12 years ago or something like that. I don't know exactly how
So
long.
for chimps, that's more than one generation, I would assume.
Uh, well,
You know what I mean? Do they have children that are being raised to hold the grudge? You know what I mean?
they don't. I don't think. But I mean, maybe they do. Maybe they do actually, because, well, chimps live to be about 60. So, um,
Okay. So I mean,
but
I guess there's a generation being born that's being
right,
taught.
right. I mean, without giving away,
They're the
like,
them, this is the us, that
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah. They
Um,
may not know why, but those guys suck.
well, look, it's not just those guys; it's that specific chimp. The other ones
Right. Okay.
they don't care so much about,
Oh wow.
which I
Okay.
think is particularly fascinating.
That's
Um,
wild.
and so there's a moment of like climax where pretty much all of the chimps from the smaller group are getting ready for war,
Oh okay.
including like the female chimps.
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah. Um, And it struck me that you don't do that unless you have no other option.
Sure. Yeah.
And because the bigger chimp group, they didn't do that,
Right.
right?
Well, no need if they're 3 times bigger, right? They
Exactly.
can
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
muster numbers that will overwhelm without getting their females involved, right?
Right. Right. Um, but I just think, you know, about how fascinating it was to like watch this documentary and to feel so connected to a species that's not us. And it's like I can see this is like like part of it is like, oh my god, this is like the foundation for like the Hatfields and the McCoys right here, because
Mm-hmm.
like these two chimp groups hate each other, and they can just go on hating each other for generations and then not know, like, so that was fascinating. But it was also fascinating to see naturally how the gender roles emerged, right? And it was only under extreme duress did the roles themselves sort of, you know, break down and become
Right.
more
Yeah.
permeable.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and
There
that's
would
really
have to
what.
be there would have to be really no other option, like I mean, I guess that smaller chimp group, it became it's us or them. We're all going to die or they're all going to die. Like,
Mm,
you know, we're either going to kill them all or we're going to die trying,
mm.
uh, which is insane. But, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
if
I
they
mean,
get pushed to
just for
that,
no, like, I highly recommend that anybody watches it.
what's it
It's
called again?
Chimp Empire.
Chimp Empire. All right. I'm
Yeah,
putting a note that I want to
yeah,
watch that.
yeah. I mean, this it looks like they got the cameras right next to these chimps. It's out of control.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and they do a really good job too of like crafting the story between the chimp groups and how it
Well,
unfolded. So,
it's interesting because obviously chimps slash bonobos, I would include them because they're basically chimps. They're pretty close.
mm,
Um, I guess the way the evolution worked was a river formed, and on this side they became bonobos, and on this side they stayed chimps for
mm,
whatever
mm.
the environmental differences were. Um, but with either of them, the DNA is like 96% a match to us or something like that. It's
Yeah,
not very far
it
off.
might even be higher than that, but yeah,
It
yeah,
maybe I'm
yeah.
not remembering right, but I know it's above 90, which
Oh yeah,
is
it's the
like
vast majority of it.
that's close.
Yeah.
So they're a good um, kind of like we can study them and see kind of how we were, when we were less evolved. Um,
But it can also give us context for why we are the way that we are now.
sure, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
because you see where did this come from? One thing that's interesting, I forget if it was bonobos or chimps, but there was an experiment where they introduced currency,
Hmm.
and by currency I mean basically pebbles.
Right.
So they gave them these pebbles, and if the pebbles gave, or if the chimps gave a pebble to one of the keepers, they would get a piece of food. So
Okay.
they immediately started seeing a value that this is
To the
what they
pebbles.
wanted to
Yeah.
find out was like, what are you going to do with your currency? And nearly immediately, females started selling sex. I mean, as soon as the group kind of caught on, you can trade this for food.
Mm,
They were like, there were females that were
mm,
like, well, I like food. If I get more pebbles, I can have more food. So they they literally started whoring themselves out.
mm.
And look, this isn't meant to be a dig. It's an interesting, like,
You
that's,
know, I'll say this. I think
I
we
would
have to
assume the
get
same thing happened with
like
people.
I think we have to get over this notion that like we can't talk about unflattering truths. Like,
Sure. Well, look, it sounds cliche, but I think it's true. Um, Men want sex. I forget how it goes. It's something like, women, that's what it is. Women use sex to get what they want, and men want sex.
mm,
So,
yeah, yeah.
like, that's, yeah, yep. that's how it works. That would be the thing that we want, or at least, way up there. But
I
yeah, it
mean,
was
it
wild
it
that
is
this,
like the thing, you know.
yeah, but it's
So
it's wild that this experiment, like, and they weren't necessarily expecting that. They were just curious, like, it was a very unbiased. Let's see what happens when
yeah,
they assign value to these pebbles, and within a very brief period of time, once it caught on that they could trade these pebbles for food, the women or females were immediately, well, you like sex and I like food, and I can get food with the pebbles. So
I mean, I also probably like sex too. I think that
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
sure.
Hmm.
So
I'll
I
have
mean,
to
I'm
look into
just,
that. I'd never heard that before.
yeah, and I forget, I think it might have been bonobos, but either way, they're not that much different from chimps. So
Hmm.
um yeah, I imagine the study would go the same if it was the other species. It wouldn't have really made much of a difference.
Hmm.
So
So so I wanted to ask you, what do you think are some of the criticisms? Like, do you have any criticisms for the either like the men's rights space or the red pill space or the manosphere, whatever you want to call it? Do you have any criticisms? Do you have any critiques?
well, obviously those movements are kind of a reaction or a pushback on feminism. Um, and I
Well,
think
not okay.
I
So
I
I do want to push back on that just a little bit because I don't think it's a response to feminism itself. I think it's a response to the way that feminists, specifically the radical feminists, are carrying out the doctrine.
sure, but they become kind of the face of that
Yes.
movement, I think. Much like the incel or whatever has become the face of the red pill movement.
Right.
Um, so I think it's a pushback on that, the face of the movement. And I at one time I thought this was brilliant, and then I found out that yeah, someone came up with this much further back than I had ever conceived it. But um, I had this idea that physics affects everything, right?
Mm.
So a social movement, just like an object, once put in motion, can't really stop.
Mm.
It has to keep going, right? Um, and then I found out that there was some physicist that came up with this idea, and he applied it to economics and social movements and the
Mm.
whole bit. I forget his name, but so I thought I was really smart for a second, and then found out no, someone a lot smarter than me came up with this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it holds
Little
true that
humbling.
that
Little
once,
humbling. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that once a social movement starts, like the tendency is for it to just keep going,
Mm.
and we've seen that with feminism, right? The they made it into the workplace. They got the right to vote. Um, I think we're at a point now where at least legally, under the law, men and women are seen as equal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as getting jobs, men and women are seen as equal.
Mm.
Um, but this movement, in terms of the feminist movement, wants to keep going, right?
Right. It's like
So
what do you need to happen before you stop? Like what will do it before you say okay, we've arrived at
right,
equality
yeah,
between the sexes?
and I think that's an unanswerable question because a social movement wants to keep moving,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
And
um,
I don't
I
think
found,
enough people have thought about that within the movement.
yeah, yeah, right. And so I think it's gotten to a point where I'm not sure they even know. There's just a desire. Well, it's not enough. So um, it's gotten to a point now where, again, the face of the movement, maybe not individual feminists, but the
Mm.
the the appearance of that movement is now that they want what would amount to special treatment.
Mm.
And so I think that the men's rights, red pill, manosphere stuff was a response to that idea. Like, well, wait a minute, we're equal.
Right. This is what
This should
equality
stop.
really looks like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course,
That's their view. That's what they are saying.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And like, so, um, I mean, you've gotten to a point now where, um, if you point out some of these biases that have appeared, like in the court system, it's, well, you're a misogynist, and it's like, well, no, I think we're being treated equal, and you're seeking, or have achieved in some cases, a bias the other way,
yeah.
right? Maybe the bias used to be towards men. Now it's,
Well,
more of a
I think
bias
you
towards
see
women.
like in no other realm is that more apparent than in the courts. Not
Sure.
just family court, but it tons of studies have shown that women who are accused of, or women who are tried for the exact same crime as men with nearly identical history of crime, like, are given far lighter sentences.
Yep. Yep. And where the men's rights movement points it out a lot has to do with sexual abuse.
Mm, yeah.
Male teachers, for example, who abuse male students
Mm.
are treated much more laxly, to the point where, like,
You mean female student or female teachers who abuse male students?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Did I say it the other way?
You said male teachers
See,
who,
I even
yeah.
have the bias.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
But yeah,
yeah, female teachers that abuse male students, to the point where there are cases that victims are being ordered to pay child support.
yeah, I've heard about that. It's
It's, I
infuriating.
mean, talk about victim blaming.
Yeah.
Um, you know, one quote from a judge was like, "Well, just because you're a victim doesn't mean you don't have responsibility." And it's like, whoa, whoa, what the
Yeah.
fuck? Hopefully, you're cool with
Mm-mm.
cursing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the only response to something like that is like, wait a minute. Um, this kid, at least at the time, had no choice in this, had no agency.
Yeah.
And now, because he's economically viable, he grew into an adult and has a job or whatever. It's like, well, we're going to start taking your income because, it just so happened that your abuser became pregnant.
I mean, it's an
Um,
absolutely, like, it's a nightmare situation.
yeah, yeah. So, um, I mean, that's one way that kind of, the feminist movement pushed for this, and they've shifted, kind of like we were talking about the Overton window earlier. They've
Hmm.
shifted the bias from favoring men in, well, I don't know that family court necessarily favored men, previously, but, uh, you know, I'll put it this way: the idea behind alimony, that came about because at the time, women weren't in the workplace, especially if they were married. Like, the goal of most women was to get married and then you can stop working.
Mm.
So if shit hit the fan and you ended up with a divorce, which was very hard to get back then, we're talking like the 50s and 60s, in most states, the person petitioning for a divorce had to prove adultery on the part of the other person.
Mm.
So in the case that a divorce was granted, it made sense to say to the man who could hold down a job, well, we can't leave this woman destitute with these children. Also, it was a given that the woman would have custody and take care of the children,
Mm.
because they had something called they called it the tender years doctrine. The belief was that up to a certain age, children needed a mother more than they needed a father. They needed
Mm.
kind of the maternal, um, what do they call that? I want to say coddling, but that's not the right word. The nurturing of a
Yes.
mother more than they needed the stern hand of a father.
Mm.
Um, so they would make the father, um, pay alimony and child support to ensure that she had an income, because it was just a given. Well, she can't go back to work. She's, a a 30-year-old woman. Who's going to hire her? Well,
Right.
now, guess what? Even with
Anybody.
gaps in the
Yeah.
resume, a 30-year-old woman has no problem getting a job. It may not be, it may not be too, because the thing that's thrown around in court is to bring, uh, what do they call that? Keep them in the lifestyle they've grown accustomed to,
Mm.
which I think is complete garbage. It's like, sorry, like the
Yeah.
dude doesn't get to keep the lifestyle he grew accustomed to because he's now giving half his money away.
Right. Right.
You know? So that shift has been devastating to men. And like I said, you go back, there was a justification. Now that's kind of not true again because of the things that the feminist movement pushed for.
Mm.
And look, I'm not saying, I do think that employers should look equally at men and women
Mm.
for the most part. I mean, there are physical jobs where maybe that's not the case, oil workers and things like that,
Mm.
um, and the flip to that though is if a woman can move the kind of weight and has the strength to do it, then great, hire her.
Right. Right. And
Um,
this is the thing. It's like the job should be open to anybody, but the standards for the job should not it should also be the same for anybody who's
right.
applying.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, if you can handle the work, then great, you're hired.
Yeah.
Right, regardless. Nothing else really matters. Like, can you do the job?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think the men's rights movement came about as a response to those kind of things. Um, and the criticisms oftentimes boil down to, well, it's misogynist. Well, okay, isn't it anti-feminist to go, even after a divorce, you still need a man to support you?
I'm sure they love that.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I thought you were a strong, independent woman. What happened?
Mm. Mm.
And that's my response to those criticisms is, I thought we were dealing with strong, independent women. What's going on?
Um, so look, there's a lot I think that we can dive into, but I did ask you for for specific critiques or criticism about like the red pill space or the manosphere or the men's
Mm,
rights movement. So um, I think because I have some at least critiques from what I've seen. Uh, I, I I think they're it's hard to say that they're like, oh, they're good for men, because I don't think about things that way. I think about things um, in the sense that like there's some insight or there's something valuable in basically anything, and it's your responsibility to figure out where that value is, right?
sure.
And I feel that I'm contradicting myself from my statements earlier about how much I hate documentation and how I feel it's meaningless and has no value. And that's fine. I'm allowed to contradict myself because I'm not a perfect person. And if somebody wants to question me on that, then I'm open to it. But um, I think that I'm also not advocating for the legislation that would abolish all documentation, right? That is an important distinction to make. I'm not saying anybody should do anything differently. I'm just saying I don't see any value in it. Um, but with the red pill space, it legit like the red pill stuff legitimately saved my marriage and probably my life too. And so a lot of the criticisms and a lot of the critiques, like they're not even real. They're not real criticisms. Most of them are not. Most of them are just like, oh, I don't like what these guys. I don't like what these guys are saying. So let's cancel them. That's really
Right.
what it amounts to. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts on legitimate criticisms for the people in the space and.
Well, I haven't heard a lot of legitimate criticisms. I mean, a lot of them are kind of the empty, well, you just hate women.
Mm,
Um, I think there are those people that have gravitated to that movement, sure.
yeah.
Um, and some with good reason. Like, I mean, if you've been screwed over by the family court system, especially, or the criminal court system,
Mm,
um, and it's clear that it's because of a gender bias, and you're the discriminated gender, you'll be upset.
yeah. Yeah. I think part of it too is that the we'll say followers, fans, supporters, I don't know what you would want to call them, uh, tend to have not the most nuanced perspective on it. And that can kind of flavor the whole thing,
Right.
but I don't think that that's really a valid criticism of the thing itself, right? Because your criticism is for people who don't have a more refined idea about the red pill. Your criticism is not about the red pill. Um, so I would say one of the things that I do take issue, I guess you could say, with the red pill is that they don't put forth a vision for what it means, like for what being a man could mean. There's a lot of
Well,
talk about
I,
like,
I think I think part of that is because they're advocating for men, and they're, especially with the advent of terms like toxic masculinity and the patriarchy, I think they're trying to shy away from, um, like I think they want to be able to say, well, we're not pushing these gender stereotypes. You know what I mean? That because
hmm,
I think that's an argument back to feminists who are like, oh, you just want us in the kitchen or whatever. And I think that's done, maybe not intentionally, but I think they're kind of like, well, we're not saying anything about gender roles. We
hmm,
just think that men should be treated equally and fairly.
hmm.
Um,
Okay, so
I
I
think
do
part of it.
be, because there is a distinction to be made between the quote unquote red pill and like the men's rights movement.
Sure, yeah,
So I think that there are fundamental differences between those two. Um, and so I actually have criticisms of both of them. Um, my my criticism boils down to, I think, on both sides, that there isn't a it's hard to say. It's like there's no identity. Um, it's not quite right either. But it's like we said, like I said earlier, being a man is awesome, right? And so, but there are things about being a man that are unique to men. And so if you're going to put forth a vision for men, I think at the bare minimum, it has to include those things. And I don't think that either space does a very good job of making that clear, making it clear what those things are and why they're, um, you know, valuable, maybe even virtuous. So let me give you an example.
Okay,
A lot of the posts that I see on like the men's rights Reddit page boils down to men whining about the state of affairs.
sure,
It's not unfounded. That's not my point. That they're whining unfounded. My point is
right.
that
Their complaints are valid. It's like, okay, so let's offer solutions.
yeah, 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 right. Instead of blaming the other side, like there has to be a different way. And then on the flip side, it's like the red pill space being all about becoming what they refer to as a high value man, which it's to an extent, I understand why, that would be attractive to a lot of people, but it's focused on uh, money, network, and having success with women, which is
Right. Yeah.
fine, but it's
I mean, my I would say my main critique about the red pill movement um, is that it's very um, it kind of boils down to fuck bitches and make money.
yes, yes, yes,
And it's like, okay, but like you said, so are are we saying that that's what makes a good man? Because I'm not sure that that's
right.
quite what makes a good man.
Right, and
I mean,
this is a
that's
thing.
fun.
This is my main critique with them is that they don't differentiate between a high value man and a good man.
Sure.
Because just because you're a high value man doesn't mean you're a good man, and vice
Right.
versa. You
Yep.
could be a good man without having millions of dollars in the bank,
Right.
right? So it doesn't really put forth like somebody who's like me, who's kind of like more nerdy in that sense. Uh, there's not a whole lot of that's attractive about the high value man uh, goal, you know,
Sure. Yeah.
whatever archetype. Because again, like being coming from the liberal side of things, it's weird that like I didn't care about making money. I didn't care about that. I didn't care about capitalism. I didn't care about the system. I didn't care about the really anything. But I was kind of entrenched in the idea that the whole thing needs to be like brought down. And I also wasn't interested in the more traditional masculine thing. So I was never really interested in cars. I was never really interested in sports. I was interested in, like I said, I'm more kind of a nerd. So, I watched a lot of anime growing up. I still do. I watch some, when I have some free time. But I think there's a substantial portion of the population, men specifically, that have a more feminine temperament. And looking at what's going on in the red pill space can be immediately off-putting.
Sure. Yeah. And in fact, I would argue that the men go their own way thing is almost more of a response to the red pill. They're kind of
Yeah,
like,
that's a good
because
point.
they're
Yeah.
not interested in women. Like
Yeah.
that's the whole point. They're not, and I get some of those arguments too. It's not worth it, especially marriage in this
Hmm.
day and age, because like we talked about with the alimony and child support and all
Right.
that stuff, if it goes south, you're fucked.
Yeah.
And I understand that argument. Um,
I also don't think that that is also the appropriate response.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
It's because it's weird. Like, you mentioned you're married,
mhm.
so that kind of automatically precludes you from the red pill, get bitches money thing.
It
Uh,
does, and it doesn't. I mean, but I see what you mean.
because
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
typically don't point to, oh, you landed a wife as like you did
And
it.
two
You
kids,
were like
man.
right.
Wife,
You
two kids.
arrived.
And, I, I, I legitimately love my life. Right. And so, no, I don't have a six-figure income.
But
Right.
you were clearly
But
a high value man, at least to that woman.
And there,
You
I
know what
mean,
I
there's
mean?
also that. It's not just. I care more about being a good man than I do about being a high value man. And so just because you're not a high value man, it doesn't mean like you can't generate a sense of adventure, for your family and for your woman specifically. And it doesn't mean that you can't generate a good life for them. And it doesn't mean any of that, right?
Sure.
It just means that you're not in the pinnacle, not in the
Well,
1% according to these metrics.
and I would say maybe their version of a high value man isn't necessarily what you want to be, but if your goal is marriage and a
Hmm.
family, you do have to present some kind of value to somebody, right?
Hmm.
um
Yeah, you have to. You have to.
Even if it's subconscious, women need to see a future with you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
That's why, I mean, it's we ridicule the 30-year-old loser who lives in his mom's basement and plays video games all day. Right? Both men and
Yeah,
women ridicule that guy.
the men go their own way guy.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, to put it bluntly, that's the incel or whatever. Um, yeah, it's weird. Like, and I don't know necessarily how much this has to apply, but I saw kind of a frightening statistic about how the percentage of under 30-year-olds who are virgins has basically flipped in terms of gender.
Mm.
So it used to be a very small percentage of under 30, or maybe it's at 30. Um, Males were virgins,
Mm.
and now that's like skyrocketed.
Yeah, it's like 1 in 3, I think.
But women now, because there's no shame in being a slut, have not being a virgin is just poof.
Yeah.
Uh, to the point where it's almost exact opposites of as it has traditionally been.
Yeah.
Um, which is and Jordan Peterson addressed this a little bit and took a lot of flack, because he was saying that the incel thing comes from basically the how we've kind of gotten rid of the idea of monogamy in a lot of ways in our society.
Mm.
Because his thing was there would be more women available to those guys if women stuck with one partner.
Mm.
And the fact that now there's no shame in sleeping around, they go for the high value male and
Right.
leave these guys behind. Which I think that's true. I don't know. Like he talked about having to enforce monogamy. I don't know how you do that. Like, what, you pass a fucking law that
Well,
says you
no, no,
can't
it's
keep
not,
guys
and
around, or
because I've heard him clarify his stance on this. Enforced monogamy is not. Um, it's not. I don't really think that you don't enforce it with legislation. You enforce it
right,
with social norms. So
right, yeah,
the uh, okay, so like slut shaming, you
yeah,
know, used to be a way to enforce monogamy,
sure,
socially. Now, whether it's right or wrong to slut shame, I don't know. I'm not interested in that conversation.
right,
Uh, One of the other way, it's like making divorce um, basically impossible was another way to enforce monogamy. Men and women having their specified roles, right? Women do this, men do this, was another way that you could enforce
well,
socially the
not
monogamy.
not having women in men's workplaces was a huge way to keep things monogamous.
Uh,
I
well, look,
mean,
I mean, women have always cheated. Okay, that's not. But I see your point.
well, what I'm getting
It's
at though is if the opportunity is not there, because I don't have any data on this, but I imagine that a lot of extramarital affairs happen or start with the workplace.
yes.
Um, so if you go back to, and there weren't women in the workplace other than gay men, they weren't really, getting any action at work. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Um, I mean, there were obviously exceptions to that with the
Yeah.
the old trope of the secretary, if you're in a position to have a secretary.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but most guys in an office didn't have a secretary though. They were in a cubicle, crunching numbers or whatever they were doing. Um, or they were working, the more blue collar manual labor jobs, where like just because of biology and the capability of doing the work, there weren't women around.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I've mentioned this a few times about various issues. There's this weird social movement, um, that I would call coming from the left, but more more in the way Ted Kaczynski referred to the left as like the psychology of leftists,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the politics, or maybe the culture of leftists, where they've pushed and kind of have achieved a shameless society. Like nothing's shameful now.
Mm.
There's almost nothing you should be ashamed of, except
Right.
maybe being a straight white male.
I mean, yeah.
Uh, But
Yeah.
there's almost no behavior that now culturally we view as shameful.
Right.
Um, so we're not enforcing much of anything in terms of socially. I mean, you know, you can feel however you want about being gay or straight or whatever. I got a lot of heat a while back because I forget what subreddit it was, but it was a poll on gay marriage. And they didn't have the option that I would have chosen. And I said it should be legal, but I think society should look down on it.
Mm.
Um, and I have my reasons for that, which I went into when people brought it up. But holy shit, I was attacked left and right.
See,
Like,
and
how is that different? How is it different to see, there was almost like well, I don't get the distinction. I'm like, there's a complete distinction. There are
yeah,
things that can
yeah,
be legal and be seen as wrong.
yeah.
I mean,
And I think that's a
do you have an
sensible.
ethical
Listen, I
code
think
that's
it.
just the law?
I mean, I think it's a sensible position to take because you're not advocating for legislation to enforce your view, right? In fact, you're
Right.
advocating for the legislation to allow the most freedom possible, and
Yep.
then you express your view on it, which is what really what the country is supposed to be. So, but look, uh, leftists, they struggle with nuance. They struggle with nuance. They don't want to. They don't want to deal with it. So, I mean, I hear you on that. I disagree personally, but I mean, I think it should be legal. Um, I feel weird about marriage in general. I'm like, why are you getting the state involved? I don't understand.
Well, yes, and that
But
was when the Supreme Court overturned that. This was another opinion that got me a lot of flack. I was like, actually, they didn't go far enough. They should have outlawed marriage licensing and got the state
yeah,
completely out of it. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
the idea that you have to go to a government building and say, to take the kind of red pill slash men go their own way um, opinion on it and allow me to give half my shit to this woman.
yeah,
It's pretty
yeah.
ridiculous.
I think I had one more question for you. Um, so do you have any questions for me?
Well, you mentioned the red pill saving your marriage and your life. Are you
Yes.
willing to go into some more details on that?
Sure.
Okay. I'd be curious how that happened.
So my wife, I'm 33, about to be 34. Our oldest daughter is, oh my goodness, she'll be 4 in December. So, um, we were 30 when we had her, and my wife and I had been together for 10 years before we had kids, married for, um, 3 years. We've been together 13 overall. And for the first 10 years before we had kids, like, our relationship was amazing, really. Uh, we understood each other, we got along well, and we had a great sex life. So it was like, um, it was so easy, so natural, and a lot of fun. And then we had kids. And like all of that changed almost overnight.
Yeah.
You know, which I think you expect, but I didn't expect the level of resentment and vitriol that came my way after, our daughter was born. And it 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 shocked me. I like, because I never would have guessed that our relationship could have gone in that direction. And so, because I had no idea what was happening. Like, she was just pissed off at me all the time and never wanted to fuck me. And I'm like, what the fuck did I do? What have I
Yeah.
done? I didn't understand. And I'm kind of like at my wit's end. And there's a night where I'm I'm probably at my lowest point, and I spent somewhere like upwards of 2-3 hours like researching. Oh, if you drink bleach, how long does it take for it to kill you? Kind of thing. Because
Jeez. Okay.
I'm like starting to plan my own suicide.
Yeah.
And the next day, like literally the next day, I'm on my way into work, and for whatever reason, I had no involvement with the red pill space up until that. Like I'm still very firmly, like I was still very firmly in my liberal views, which is part of the reason that I got in trouble with my wife to begin with, because, I'm like, oh, there's no division here. Like men can do what women do, women can do what men do.
Right.
It doesn't, so I don't have to worry about, like, I can be vulnerable and I can show you my like feelings and this, that, and the other. And it's like, but so for whatever reason, a clip from the Fresh and Fit podcast popped up, and it was titled something like, feminists are in trouble in 12 years or 20 years or whatever. And I'm like, what the fuck? Because it was just like so far outside of the realm of my thinking that it demanded my attention. So I listened to the whole thing, and it was actually Rollo Tomasi on the Fresh and Fit podcast talking about the rise of the she economy, and how companies have paid, like Fortune 500 companies have paid for research to determine what the market is going to look like in 10 or 20 years, so that can inform their decision about where to invest their money now. And it was so not what I expected. I probably expected an incredibly like misogynistic, just bashing women for the whole time kind of thing, but it wasn't that. It was a very clearly articulated argument supported with data. And then I was hooked. I'm like, okay, so there's some shit on the other side of this that's going on that I didn't even know of and nobody's talking about. So I did
Right.
so I did like a massive deep dive into that, and specifically into Rollo Tomasi's work. And what that did for me was provide context for my wife's behavior and her attitude towards me. And so biologically, evolutionarily, even like at a genetic level, right, she can sense how unstable I am. And that's what's setting her off, right? Because I was at the time, I was desperate, because I was terrified. I had no idea why she was, so disconnected from me. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know what to do to fix it. And I was internally, I was quaky, unsettled all the time. And even though I wasn't acting that out, even though I wasn't projecting that, it was still like she was still picking up on it.
Yeah.
And so once I realized that, oh, she's looking to me to be the stable one, that was the shift.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, I
There's
have
like
to.
a there's like a you need to lead this household,
Yes.
and you're not. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Um, and then I mean, so that was the turning point. When I realized that, like, oh, my role here is to provide the stability to be able to raise this family, and I'm not going to do that if I'm begging for things, or
Right.
like so there was a massive shift, I think, internally that happened as a direct result of the information that I found in the red pill space.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, and feel free not to answer. Was your wife on birth control pills before you guys had kids?
She was before, and then
Okay.
after she actually got onto a different birth control, which, I mean, if we're being honest, that was absolutely part of the issue. But
Okay.
yeah,
Well, because what I'm getting at is it's becoming clear that because what birth control does, the hormonal birth control, is it fools their body into thinking they're already pregnant,
Mm.
right? Now, here's the problem. That when that happens, you don't want a bad boy. You want like a guy that's like your brother. You can hang out and whatever. So and this is very common. Girls that get with guys while they're on birth control and then come off, they view this dude now as like a huge pussy.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Because he kind of
Well, I
is, you know what I
was.
mean?
I was. I
That's what they
absolutely
want.
was. Yeah.
And while they were on birth control, that's what they wanted. They didn't want a bad boy because that's a threat to their baby.
Right.
They don't have a baby in there right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But the biology doesn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that's a weird like thing that we're finding out societally that, again, another little feminist thing that they, and I'm not saying birth control should be illegal or anything. I just think
No.
women
Yeah.
should understand that look, if you're on birth control and get with a guy and it becomes a long-term relationship and you come off, you're going to view him completely differently because of those hormones than you did when you were on.
You might, right? Because not everybody's different, but it's important to understand that it's a possibility,
Yeah,
right?
that's a risk. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
it's a
I
risk,
don't think
and
that's a risk that's talked about
I
enough.
don't think it's talked about at all because I don't think I've ever
Yeah.
heard it. And
Well, unless you listen to Gavin McGinnis, you probably haven't. That's who I heard it from. I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And I've known a lot of guys. Once she went off birth control, she fucking hated me. Um,
yeah, but this is the thing.
cheating on me.
It's like she she did, but I figured it out quick,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so
no, and
now there's no
you're
option for that, you know,
right.
and and so it doesn't happen anymore,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it was easier to fix than because I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was become really strong and independent.
yeah.
That's really all that happened. It's like I
I
stopped
mean,
relying on her for things. I became
to
my
put
own
it
man.
put it kind of bluntly, you had to man up,
I did.
and then once you did, you were good.
Yeah, and our relationship is better now than it's ever been. We have 2 kids,
That's awesome.
and we're like it's so much fun. Like it's just so much fun in this house all the time, and that's in large part because of how much work we put in as parents because we love being parents, and it's because of the kind of woman that she is and the kind of character that she has, but it's also because of how much I've grown up, right? Because if I wasn't because I really do consider myself the backbone of the house, right? And so it's emotionally within, I'm the backbone, but I don't have there's no room for fuckery, right?
Yeah,
And I think people can tell that just from my vibe. Like
yeah.
I'm open and I'm honest and I own my shit, but you are not going to pull the wool over my eyes. It is not going to happen. Right?
See, and I would go so far as to say that's the real red pill.
Yes.
It's, you know, um, be the um, be the dude that the potential mate can see. A could like crush someone's head if necessary.
Yes. And I
You know
feel
what I
that.
mean?
I feel that.
And but B has that under control
Yes.
and will provide and protect for the family. That's the real high value male. That's the real red pill, is be that
Right.
guy.
Right. Well, I think that's a good place to stop.
All right.
So listen, Trevor, it was great to talk to you. Thanks for coming out and giving some of your whatever incredibly offensive and toxic opinions and allowing me to talk about some of mine. So
I love giving those.
yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I guess I should have done it in the beginning. I'm still figuring this stuff out. So, but if you want to give a shout out to your podcast or websites or
Sure,
anything like
yeah.
that, so go ahead. I'll
So,
put it in the
yep.
description when this goes up to YouTube too.
Yeah. We stream live every Thursday, not to YouTube, but we do go out on Rumble.
Mm.
And to be honest, the best place to see it would be our own website because I always post, I embed videos and stuff there. But you can go to ManToolsMedia.com, and that's where everything is. I also want to say, coming up, because I need to be plugging this, we are doing a fundraiser for 22 Until None, which, if you're not familiar, that is a group that's trying to get the veteran suicide from 22 a day, which is probably a
Mm.
fairly conservative estimate, down to none.
Mm-hmm.
So
Good work.
if you go to vetsday.mantoolsmedia.com, you'll see our fundraiser. If you donate $2, you'll get into our Veterans Day live stream that will only be for donors, which is going to feature some cool guests. And then if you donate $22, you can win a prize in a raffle. And trust me, the prizes are valued at much more than 22
Mm.
bucks. And then if we raise $2,200, I will get my first ever tattoo live on the air during the stream. So
Oh man,
if you would
stakes.
like to see that, throw some money in.
Hell yeah, hell yeah.
That's about all I got to plug.
All right. Well, once again, thank you, guys. Go check out the link in the description. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next one.
Thanks for having me.